Today I am making a chocolate ganache cake with a mirror glaze, and here I have my ingredients for my ganache, which are dark chocolate wafers. I have butter, I have heavy cream, I have a small pot to heat up my cream until it's at a simmer, and then I'm going to pour that over the chocolate wafers to allow them to soften and melt. And so I'm going to let that sit for a little bit. And then after about 5 minutes or so, I'm going to come back and stir, 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 and stir. So today I decided to make this cake. I had been wanting to try making a mirror glaze for a while. I've never done it before, but I figured why not go for it, and I haven't baked anything in a while. So here I am incorporating the butter. Now there are a lot of ways that you can make a ganache. Obviously you could have just put all this in the microwave, at least the cream and the chocolate melted that way. You could have used a double boiler. I chose to just heat up the cream, but I do it differently depending on how I'm feeling. So at the end, I stir in the butter to give it more of a shine. And then after it's all thoroughly mixed, I'm going to cover it with plastic wrap and let it sit and cool off while I prepare the cake. And I like to use these pans with removable bottoms, and I spray them and do my little parchment rounds at the bottom. I also often use cake strips, or I always use cake strips with cake pans. And you soak them in water. They're quilted strips, which keeps the cake from rising too quickly, which creates that little hump in the middle, so it leads to even layers. Now I'm going to mix up my cake batter. So I'm going to hydrate this cocoa powder. I heard a chef that works for one of the top chocolatiers say that this is a good idea. It blooms the flavor to hydrate the cocoa powder in your liquid that you're using for your recipe, as opposed to just mixing it in with the flour. So I'm going to let that sit while I mix the rest. 3 eggs, some vegetable oil. I think I used canola, vanilla. Mix that up a little bit. I don't really want to aerate it. I just want to get it all incorporated. And then in my bigger bowl, I'm going to add my dry ingredients, sugar, flour, my leaveners. Mix that up a little bit with the whisk. And then I'm going to add my wet ingredients into the dry gradually. It's very hard to get cocoa powder to dissolve in liquid. I could have pulled out a blender or something, but I didn't want to use any more equipment. There's also coffee in here. I forgot that. There's instant espresso powder mixed with water in there. So I'm combining the two now. This is all-purpose flour, so I do not want any gluten to really form because I don't want a tough cake. I'm not making bread here. And so I'm just mixing it until the big lumps are gone, and that's it. And so now I'm going to pour it into my pans as evenly as I can. If I were being really precise, and in the past I have when I've made multiple layer cakes, I might weigh the actual pan and the batter to make sure they're all equal. But for this, I'm just winging it. I'm doing 2 layers. These are 8 or 9 inch, and then I'm going to cut them in half, so I will have a 4-layer cake. But you see, when you have this removable bottom, how easy it is to get your cake out of the pan. You don't have to do much at all, just kind of push it up through the bottom. So I'm going to let these cake layers cool off before I go any further. So now they're cool. I have my handy dandy little cake layer cutter, which is just like a metal thing with a thin wire in between, and you just kind of saw your cake in whatever height layers you want. This thing is wonderful. It's much better than a knife to me because I definitely get even cuts all the way around. So again, I'm making a 4-layer chocolate cake here, and so I am cutting each of my layers in half. All right, so I got my cake board, and I just used a little piece of masking tape on the bottom of that to get it to stick to my turntable, my cake decorating turntable, so it's not sliding all over the place. And I'm getting ready to start frosting these layers with the ganache. I'm using a very thin layer of the ganache because remember, this cake is going to be covered with a mirror glaze, so I don't want a lot of thick frosting. Also, if you were not using a mirror glaze, you could whip this ganache up and it would turn into a nice fluffy fudgy chocolate frosting, but I did not want it to be fluffy because I'm again coating this, and so I just kept it as is. and spread it as thin as possible. Also, I didn't want to run out of ganache because the original recipe was really just for a 2-layer cake. And since I am doing 4, I actually needed a little bit more, but I just barely made it. Basically this cake just has a crumb coat. There is no second coat because I didn't have any more ganache. So if you were going to do this, for 4 layers and just have it as a regular chocolate frosted cake, you might want to double the amounts of ganache that you make for this. So now I'm just kind of smoothing the sides out here, trying to get it as smooth as possible because this mirror glaze, from everything I've read, it really does show imperfections, and so you need your cake, your frosting, to be as smooth as possible. It's a little bit of a challenge simply because this is a ganache, and the cooler ganache gets, the thicker it gets and the more it starts to set. My cake layers are room temperature. The ganache is room temperature, but even so, as I'm getting towards the end, I feel it getting stiffer and stiffer, and it's harder for me to smooth it. So I'm trying to work as quickly as I can. I'm not going for perfection here. This cake is, I'm just making it for myself. It's not for guests or anything. And it's an experiment because I've never done this whole mirror glaze thing before. And so I'm just doing my best here. Basically, after I frost this, I'm going to put it in the refrigerator because I do need the ganache to harden before I coat it with the mirror glaze. Uh, yeah, definitely. And so we're going to set this in the refrigerator and let it chill a bit while I make the mirror glaze, because the mirror glaze actually has to cool down a bit um, before you can pour it over the cake, because it's a cooked glaze, so you don't want to melt the frosting. So you kind of got to let it cool a bit to a little bit above room temperature. Now, this is hardened. So what I did was I got a bowl of very hot water. I got my metal scraper and I've, set it in the hot water to heat it up. That will melt your frosting. This is a trick you use with any kind of frosting. If you have imperfections and you want a very smooth finish, you can chill the cake, dip your blade, whatever you're using, into hot water. Wipe off the water though, and then finish your smoothing and kind of get it the way you want it. So that's what I've done here. I've done the best I can. Oh, all right, so here we go. We're making the mirror glaze. That cake is in the fridge. And so this mirror glaze, you have to use gelatin. I'm blooming my gelatin. I have cocoa powder, I have sugar, I have cream, I have some water. Um, so to bloom your gelatin, you just mix it with a little water and let it sit for about 5 minutes. I am sifting the cocoa powder to try to minimize any lumps in this glaze. This will set to a shiny, slick, dark brown, almost black glaze. And so you want it as smooth as possible because you don't want lumps or imperfections showing up. And also this glaze will be strained 2 times to further make sure that it is as smooth as possible. So I'm mixing my water and my cream in with the cocoa powder here. That's been sifted. And I'm gonna mix in my sugar as well. And then I'm gonna put that all in a pot. And then I am going to cook it until it comes to a simmer. Once it comes to a simmer, I'm going to stir in my gelatin. And then again, continue to whisk, and let that come back to a simmer. And just cook it for a few minutes to make sure the gelatin is activated and everything's melted, including the sugar. You just want to make sure it's very, very smooth. All right, there we are. It's simmering. Now I'm going to add in my gelatin and then cook it just a little bit more, a couple of minutes to make sure, like I said, it's all activated and all blended well. And then I am going to take it off the heat and strain it into a bowl. Now, once I've strained the gelatin mixture, I am going to cover it with plastic wrap. You want the plastic wrap to be touching the liquid, and also I'm scraping down the sides because this has gelatin, remember, so this is going to start to set up and I don't need anything stuck to the sides. So you want to make sure that plastic wrap is actually touching the surface so you don't get a skin on top. And then, once it's cool enough, then a little bit above room temperature, then you're going to strain it a second time right before pouring it on your cake. So you got to move fast and be ready to go. Now, I have decided to set my cake up on this little upturned bowl, and pour my glaze that way. As I'm pouring the glaze, one thing I immediately notice is that this glaze seems a little bit thick. Now, I haven't done this before, but I'm thinking it's a little bit too thick for to flow and cover the way I want to. But I've already started this thing, and what's done is done. I can't go back now. There's no stopping now. You just have to go for it. So I'm already thinking, okay, I'm gonna have to figure out some way to smooth this after I get it all coated, because generally it should be liquid enough where you pour it fairly quickly and it just flows all over the top and sides of the cake, and that's it. So you're not trying to touch it really or anything like that because you want it to set smoothly. I did not have those results, so I had to go to plan B. My plan B, knowing this was gelatin, I got some hot water and a cake spatula, and there I am. Just heating up the blade so that it melts the gelatin just a little bit so that I can get a smooth finish on my cake, and it worked for the most part. I mean, it isn't exactly what should have happened, but at the same time, I am rescuing this cake using the extra that I have, the extra glaze to fill in any gaps, and just smoothing it again with my warmed uh, cake palette knife there. And I'm just going to do that until I think it's smooth enough. And now this sets up pretty quickly, so you have to move fast, and you don't want to refrigerate this after. It is gelatin, remember, so it's kind of a gel consistency, but chocolatey. So you really don't want to put this in the refrigerator. It will set up on its own within 10 or 15 minutes. So now here we are, about 20 minutes later. I'm decorating it just with a little luster dust, sprinkled across the top. No real plan here. I'm going to add some edible gold beads to the center as well. And then I'm going to add a little bit of gold leaf. I love gold leaf, silver leaf. I just love the way it looks, especially against either chocolate, like really dark dessert, or really light dessert. It looks good as well, like with a vanilla buttercream type deal. It just really contrasts nicely. So a little bit of gold leaf, and now I'm just cleaning up the edge. Now what I decided to do was use the luster dust to kind of paint a little bit of a gold sheen on my cake plate. Now, so next I'm gonna cut and taste the cake, and I will say the cake was delicious. Even though the glaze wasn't exactly what I wanted, it was still very pasty, just not as smooth as I would like. So the recipe for the cake came from my culinary school cookbook. The recipe for the glaze I did get on the internet, and I'll put a link for that, even though I'm gonna search for a different recipe, or maybe wait till I start pastry school and I'll get one there that's maybe a little bit better, a little bit easier to work with. All right, that's it. Bye bye.